So yeah, my name's Nick Jennison. At the very front of this whole thing, I will not be able to go into all the facets of permaculture in this presentation. It is a very large kind of scope thing, but I'm going to try to go specifically into how it kind of relates to climate change, relating to energy and the food systems. And that's going to kind of be my focus here, all right? So I kind of first learned about permaculture while I was traveling in South Africa. Me and my best friend just decided to quit our jobs and go backpacking in South Africa. And we were kind of doing the work exchange, work trade thing to find places to stay and get some food to eat, and so we could kind of save money along the way. And so I literally looked up on the little website, one of them said permaculture farm, and I had no idea what that was at all, but I wanted to work on a farm at some point during the trip. And my friend also did, so we went there, and within the first hour or two, he was walking around showing us all the systems, how they're interconnecting and everything. I was just hooked instantly. It all made sense in my mind. I was like, this is really cool. And so we kept traveling, and then by the time we were done, it was still there. Permaculture was still back there. And so since then, I've kind of been looking more into it, seeing what I could find out. I ended up moving out here, started jumping back into my career in theater. I work backstage in theater. I build the sets. I do all this stuff. In fact, this morning I kind of fixed this setup because it was broken for a second. So came in here and did that. And then I was in there and just realized I wasn't happy. I really wanted to learn more about permaculture. So I started volunteering at 21 Acres. That's kind of how I started there. Volunteered enough that they're like, hey, you do a lot of work here. Maybe you should work for us. So now I'm down at 21 Acres. So that's kind of what I was there. This past year I worked online. I did an online course with Jeff Lawton, who's one of the bigger names in permaculture these days. And that's kind of where I've done my permaculture training. So I'm going to try to communicate all those ideas and thoughts and share that with you. And hopefully you'll learn something. I hope. So I just by show of hands, does anyone know what permaculture is? Seems like most of you, which is kind of cool because oftentimes I don't. So I know there's some people who don't, and I'm going to explain it to you. We're going to go a little bit in depth. So really understanding what permaculture is kind of aimed to do, you really have to understand kind of what's behind permaculture, right? So that's where we're going to start. What permaculture is not really is where I want to start. A lot of people have this connotation. Permaculture is basically these hippie communes that get together, do organic gardening, like peace and love, try to keep it easy and all that. Permaculture can be applied to those places, but that is not what permaculture is, all right? So I just want to get that right off the bat. There is that connotation, I hear it a lot, and I like to just face those right away, let's talk about that. So originally it was designed by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in an intensive working relationship, and this was in Australia. And it was in the mid-1970s, and it initially started essentially as a way to focus on agriculture in a way that a system that can be put together and be permanent long-term. So essentially it was an amalgam of the two words, permanent and agriculture, permaculture, right? Focus was initially on organic farming, essentially, right? That's what they want to do. So the definition by what they were talking about, it's an integrated system of perennial or self-perpetuating plant and animal species useful to man. Very broad, very agricultural based. Essentially it's permanent system, perennial systems that can be producing. So you don't have to be putting all these inputs into it every single year. It's a system that's kind of long living. Essentially you're mimicking nature in that way because nature already knows how to do it. It just does by itself out there. It's doing it without any extra help. Obviously we put a lot of those there because they developed this area, but in the actual wild, everything's just living. We don't have to put anything into it. As they developed it though, and as they kind of worked more into it, they realized it can't just be about the farming. It has to be about the people. It has to be about the culture. It has to be very culturally oriented and really community oriented, because otherwise you can't really have someone managing this organic agriculture kind of stuff. It really needs to be fully encapsulated with everything. It's about the society. It's about those cultures and the communities around them. So kind of end up turning into this permanent culture. Luckily that word's right there already, so it was pretty easy to be like, oh yeah, it's about that now, right? So permanent culture, permaculture, right? That's what you're looking at. So again, let's do another definition. Nice long wordy definition. Consciously designed landscapes which mimic the patterns and relationships found in nature while yielding an abundance of food, fiber, and energy for the provision of local needs. That's a lot of, again, blah blah blah, but that's a much better kind of relationship and definition of what permaculture is trying to do there, all right? So let's just couple little notes in that definition. The mimicking nature, that's what it is. It's found in nature. What's nature doing? We're trying to mimic those patterns because it already knows what it's doing. It's had millions of years to develop that, and it knows what it's doing, right? So if we just mimic those patterns and the things that you find in nature, it's going to work out great. And also, Humans are really a part of the natural ecosystem. That's what we need to be focusing on. As society, humans often think of themselves, we're above and we're in control of everything, but really we're just part of the whole Earth ecosystem. We maybe are the keystone species of the entire Earth. We are kind of in control of everything that is happening, but we are still part of that ecosystem. We need to recognize that and really focus on it. So those definitions are kind of hard to explain, and like, this is what permaculture is. There's a lot of wordiness and everything like that. So let's get a little bit into the specifics. Permaculture is a design science, all right? It's a design science, and it's grounded by ethics. Almost every traditional, every traditional society was grounded in ethics. They're caring about the land that they are. I don't know if any of you were in the talk right before here, they were talking about the tribal peoples around here and talking about how the earth and the environment is completely part of their culture. It's part of them, that's who they are. They're part of that, and that's how we have to be thinking for the future. Because we've kind of separated. We've gone, okay, we're in control of the environment, it's something that we're talking about, we're doing everything with that. That's not how we can think if we're actually going to have a sustainable regenerative system in the future. We have to consider ourselves as part of the system, okay? But permaculture is about people. So let's look at the three things. These are the three kind of tenets, these are the core ethics of permaculture. Starts with earth care, caring for the earth, caring for the soil. Soil is a very big part of it. Animals, plants, humans are included in that. So we're moving on to people care. People care is really, it's about community, it's about the culture that you're in. You have to be very respectful of the actual culture that you're working for. There's going to be different cultural requirements all throughout the world based on the culture that you're in. So permaculture isn't just like, this is how you apply it, it's this is how you apply it in that specific area. That's really important. You have to consider the community. You can't just be throwing all your stuff at these people, right? And then the last one is fair share. It's also, there's many different ways that people put this one. So the best way to describe it is essentially setting limits to consumption and reproduction and redistributing surplus. All traditional peoples did this. They knew that they can't have way too many people and completely consume all the resources around them. That's just going to kill who they are, because who they are is part of that ecosystem. It's part of nature, right? That's what we have to be looking at. Okay, let's keep going now. So more about permaculture. So another way to kind of put it, kind of the best way to put it is, it's the use of systems thinking and design principles that provide the framework for implementing the permaculture vision. We talked about that permaculture vision in those first two slides. All right, so it's really the use of systems thinking and design principles. Does anyone know what system thinking is? A couple people? Does anyone want to give a shot at defining it? No? I'm not seeing so.
I'll play with it.
You want to play with it?
I will step forward and embarrass myself.
Love it.
So systems thinking is that there are multiple systems that are integrated and play together.
Yes. Yes, essentially. So let me give the definition, the official definition I read online. Maybe it's not the official one, but it's a very good one that I found. A holistic approach to analysis that focuses on the way that a system's constituent parts interrelate and how systems work together over time. All right, so I'm going to kind of read through that again and kind of highlight a couple things for you. All right, it's a holistic approach looking at the whole system, all right, to analysis that focuses on the way that a system, our system is Earth, that's our system, so that's our Earth care we're talking about, and its constituent parts, animals, plants, the whole climate and everything like that, and how they interrelate and how system works over time. And that kind of goes into the setting limits to consumption and making sure that we have enough to work over a long period of time there. And the other one they just talked about was the design principles. So this is what they call the permaculture flower. This is kind of a representation of a lot of different principles that are in permaculture. And at the center here, you have the ethics. That is the grounding thing of everything that we do in permaculture. Before you do any action, you're thinking about, does this help the earth? Does this help the people? And am I redistributing that surplus and putting things back into the system? You have to think about that with everything you're doing. But then you have all these different principles, observe and interact, awesome. Catch and store energy, obtain a yield, all these different things. So that's kind of what permaculture is about. It kind of all started as a response to the environmental crisis that was happening in the 1970s. They got to you have this energy crisis, we're at peak oil now, what's going to happen? They're beginning to see the effects of climate change, there's a lot of pollution, overpopulation, lots of inequity in a whole bunch of cultures and societies. So that's kind of what there was a response for. So permaculture is solution-oriented. It's a positivistic response to the climate issue. So it's not about, you guys are doing these things wrong, you need to change. It's about, I can do this. I can do these things to help my specific area because I need to help my community and I need to help the area of land that I'm specifically managing or helping out. or my communal land. That's what it's about. It's not about telling other people to do these things. It's about this is what you can do to change, and just start doing it. It's really about action. It's about moving from a global system more to a local system. That's really going to make a lot of different change there. Great quote I read about it. Reducing the dependence on global economy and replacing with household or local economies will reduce the demand that drives current inequities and waste in our system. And also local systems, smaller local systems are going to require way lower energy inputs to actually manage them, right? This all seems pretty obvious to like the casual observer, especially to people in this conference, but that is the reality, right? We need to be really looking at energy, and that's what permaculture does. Lots of energy auditing. The first thing we look at is the resource or energy inputs to a system, and then the outputs to the system. It doesn't have to be a system, it can be a specific little thing that you have in that system. You're really looking at the embodied energy of whatever product they're in. Embodied energy essentially, again, I like to read the definition so you guys get the exact thing. The definition of embodied energy is the sum of all energy consumed during the process of production of whatever that thing is, right? So let's go into a little bit more detail about that, and we'll kind of do a couple examples here. So let's consider a chicken, all right? Very simple, nice and easily kind of relating to things. So what are the inputs for chicken? You guys have any ideas? Feed, basically food, water, air, companionship. It's essentially the same as humans, right? It's the exact same thing. Exact same thing we need to give them. You need to give them food, water, shelter, air, companionship. They do need a couple of little minor grit to chew up their food. There's a lot of little minor things, but those are the major things, right? And then what are the outputs of chickens? Eggs. Meat.
Feathers.
Poop. Yeah, feathers. Great ones. So there's a lot of these really great outputs. So we're looking at what are we putting in to get these outputs. These outputs are going to have the embodied energy of these inputs, right? It's pretty simple. That's as big as the picture it is. Permaculture systems, you look at every single little thing about every part of your system and look at all of these to understand the energy inputs and outputs of your system. So there's also behaviors called scratching. They scratch up. You can actually use them to do a lot of your tilling for you if you set up the systems right. So I'm not going to go into that. We'll talk about that later if you want to talk about it specifically, because I have a very limited time to talk to you guys, so I don't want to go into that right now. So let's consider one single thing in that whole thing, all right? Let's consider industrial egg production, and then we're going to go to current, like kind of permaculture-based, kind of more holistic egg production. So we're going to start with our egg, and there's going to be a whole bunch of little diagrams coming up here, so you guys are going to have to help me out here. So we have our egg. An industrial system that's likely going to be coming from a factory farm, right? Big old building with lots of lights, lots of cages stacked up on top of each other. They're all kind of stuck in their tiny little things. Most of them are like the size of a piece of paper, like an 8x11 paper. That's the average of how much space a chicken has in those factory farms. This isn't every egg. I'm not saying that this is every industrial egg, but this is most industrial eggs are produced like that in these huge factory farms, right? So let's consider just food in this whole equation, because there's a lot of things that go into that, right? There's a lot of embodied energy in kind of an industrial system, but just considering food, right? Foods are likely pellets. This, of course, has to be made somehow. You don't just make tiny little chicken pellets, right? They have to be made in some sort of pellet factory, right? Does anyone know what go into those pellets that most people feed the chicken, or industrial systems and major people? No, it's mainly grain and fish. Grain and fish are the two things. So you get a protein and you get your carbohydrates just like that, right? So you need to have your grain processing and your fish processing, because again, you can't just put a fish and then grain together and make pellets. It has to be processed to go into the pellets, and the pellets have to be processed to make the whole thing. So of course, then we're going to a third world fish farm, most likely providing all those fish. And those are probably marginalized communities that are already protein deficient in their countries. So we're taking protein away from them where they could use all that protein there. And then from there, there's so many things I'd like to say about those. And then, you're really rushing me today. I understand. And then of course, for the grain, it's likely coming from a conventional grain farm. There's probably monoculture systems where you're losing a lot of soil. You're not going to be extremely fertile soil, so they're probably adding chemical fertilizers on there to bring up there. Of course, you're also going to have your pesticides and your biocides. Do you guys know how those are mostly produced? It's mostly petroleum, oil. So an oil refinery needs to produce those things. Of course, there's also the gasoline that's going into transporting all of that throughout that whole process there. And of course we have the oil drilling on top of all of that. So this is from the Permaculture Designer's Manual. This is exactly that thing there. And there's more into that. These guys are unhealthy, they're not treated very well. You're gonna have to pump in like hormones and all those kind of antibiotics to keep them healthy. That's chemical factories in there. You have to make all the infrastructure to make all this happen. You're gonna be using steel and ore and all that to make that happen. So all of that produces one egg. And it's not very nutritious, is it?
No.
Probably not, maybe, probably not. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Huge embodied energy, centralized system, you have to get everything to there and then everything away from there, lots of transport, lots of energy put into that. Ethically, especially with permaculture, it's probably ethically unsound at the very least for the chicken.
Yes.
Not even to talk about all the marginalized people that are gonna, along the way, it's likely the underprivileged people working in poisonous or polluted environments. They're probably underplayed and exploited. They have to live in those systems where they're right next to the airport, they're right next to the coal factories and everything because they don't make enough money because they're exploited in that way. So that's all in this specific thing. We just talked about the marginalized community, talked about soil degradation a little bit earlier, and of course the quality, probably not so good, right? Let's take a look at a permaculture system now. This is another picture directly out of the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And this one, you're designing the system based around the chicken's place in a natural ecosystem, all right? So let's look at the inputs again. I'm rushing through this to make sure I get it all to you. Let's look at food. How much of the food for that chicken can you grow yourself on site?
All of it.
Most likely all of it. Maybe you have a tiny site though. Maybe you don't have a huge site. Maybe it's just a little tiny backyard. Maybe you can't grow all of it. But what else can you do? You can add in all your kitchen scraps or all the kitchen scraps from the community around you. Kitchen scraps from a small community can feed a whole flock of chickens and that's it. And you're using your excess, your surplus to the chickens. Then the chickens are going to make surplus manure, which you can bring back to the gardens to feed you, and then the kitchen scraps to the chickens, back and forth. You're creating a cyclical system, and it's all very, very local there. That's just that. Rainwater, of course. You can collect the rainwater in a nice big old steel drum, right? So that is going to have a little bit of kind of processing. You need to make the steel, you need to make the chicken wire, you need to make the gutters and everything, right? There is some of that. But maybe you power it with renewable energy. So in that way, it's kind of not as bad for the environment. There is still some processing, still some pollution in that, but you're minimizing that, right? And of course, the shelter, they need shelter. You're gonna have a nice little hutch there, but maybe they also have shelter in all the shrubs that you're designing out here. The trees here can provide shade, but also seeds for them to eat. Little fruits from them to eat. Mulberries, very high protein fruit that they'll just drop down and they can eat those. So you're basically providing the whole system. Everything for the chicken, everything they need is provided for right on site. That's how permaculture thinks. Minimal energy input and trying to cycle all that energy over and over again throughout that whole system. That's what permaculture is about. So essentially very, very low embodied energy and really local and nutrient dense food. That's what it is. And that's kind of how we all have to be thinking, especially in this kind of age of energy descent. We're at the point now where we don't have enough oil and fossil fuels essentially to power the whole world for very long. We're going down, down, down with that. So how are we going to feed everyone in these tiny systems? We really have to reduce from that global scale because we can't be mass producing these eggs anymore. It has to be much more centralized. And I'm just talking about one single thing. It's one egg, right? We're just talking about eggs here. And that's all I can talk about in this amount of time. But it's a whole food system. How do we feed everyone when we don't have the huge fossil fuel economy to actually get everything everywhere like we are currently doing? That's what we have to be thinking about. It's moving it more local. Everything has to be moved much more local. And basically change has to come from the bottom up. You just have to start doing it. You have to start producing what you can. Grow some herbs in the pot. Encourage your community to start a community garden. Learn how to eat and grow local foods. A lot of people, that knowledge is completely lost now. And the demand for local food, we need to support that and encourage other people to do that. Hey, let's try to eat more locally. Let's try to find places to eat where the food is being produced right here on site. Seasonal local food education, that's another huge one. Your grandparents and everything, they knew how to eat seasonally and locally because that's all they had, right? We don't. I could tell you about a year ago, I didn't really know how to cook a squash, right? And I moved here and I was like, well, maybe I should learn how to cook a squash because that's pretty common like winter food around here. You know, I'm a fairly young guy and I just never thought about cooking squash before, and that's something that's here throughout the whole winter time, right? And of course, quality food affordability, that's a huge issue in the social equity kind of system. And really the answer to that, in my opinion, is growing more food locally. The more community supported growing of that and the more ways that we can do that, that's going to solve that problem. All right. So I'm just going to do, this all relates to where I work, 21 Acres. Essentially 21 Acres is a center for sustainable education and kind of community collective action. We're literally right down the road in Woodinville. There's a farm market, we have a commercial kitchen as well. In that kitchen we do cooking classes for both adults and children to teach about cooking local seasonal food. It's really about the kitchen up there, all the food they produce. They only will produce it if they can source those ingredients from within Washington State, from within about 100 miles. The farm market sources from about 100 miles. Some of it does come from Oregon, but pretty much all the food that we source and sell in the farm market is within 100 miles. We try to produce as much as we can right on site. We do have an organic certified farm on site. We're all about that education piece there. We also have a Harvest Share program, which essentially is a CSA, a community supported agriculture program, where people can pay in and essentially get high quality food, but this is specifically geared towards people of low income. So we're trying to get the low income people to be able to afford and have access to those really high quality local foods and seasonal foods. And that's kind of something we just started, I think, 2 years ago. We're trying to move more into that. So that's kind of what we have. And also volunteer opportunities. I host volunteers every single week. And if you want to get involved, the best way to get involved is just start doing it. Go somewhere, learn what's going on. Maybe it won't be of huge interest to you, but you might learn something you didn't know before. Here's one, the average food on your dinner plate. You ready for this? The average food on your dinner plate, single item on your dinner plate, travels about 1,500 miles to get there. Just imagine this, just with that, imagine all the emissions and everything that we're putting out into the air, which, emissions is one of the biggest causes of that global warming piece, the climate change piece, right? So my whole point to you is keep things more local. How can we do that? That's what we have to be thinking about. Permaculture is one way of doing it. It's not the only way of doing it, but that's one way of doing it. Just try to look at the systems, look at the energy you're putting into the system, look at the energy and the resources coming out of the system. So I'm now here, time for questions. I think I'm on time, maybe.
You're a little over.
A little over.
We have time for at
It's
least a few
acceptable.
questions.
Acceptable. If you do have to contact me, nickj@21acres.org, very easy. You can also just visit the website, 21acres.org, and I'm very happy to do that. We also have Permaculture Woodinville, which is that group we're talking about. We usually meet on the first Tuesdays of every month at 21 Acres, and we do have a meetup site for that as well as a Facebook site. So that's called Permaculture Woodinville. That is separate from 21 Acres, but we do meet at 21 Acres, so there's that. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions. Yeah?
It's not exactly a question, but I just wanted to say that you talk about with the food systems like if I drive from Seattle to Woodinville
Right.
in my car, that's worse than a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah.
So just put that on the
That-
table.
We do encourage, every time people do come to 21 Acres, we encourage either carpooling, public transportation, biking. We are right along essentially the Burke-Gilman Trail, so you can bike in from Seattle. That's an option. And yes, that's of course a huge issue, especially around here. That's kind of our biggest issue at 21 Acres is we're kind of somewhat removed from a lot of places, but we're just trying to do the best we can there, and we do encourage that transportation.
What's a good resource for us to use besides yourself and 21 Acres if we're at home or we're with family? We're not going to get an idea about permaculture techniques or even just lifestyle choices. What's kind of a good central place to find it?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of online resources for permaculture. It's very, if you just start typing in permaculture online, you're going to find a lot. Libraries now, I find a few books now throughout the library systems and the local system that do have a lot of books on permaculture. David Holmgren has a great book. Toby Hemingway, it's Gaia's Garden. There's a book called Gaia's Garden. Really great book. Locally, Jesse Bloom and Dave Bainlin, I forget how to pronounce his last name, it's called Practical Permaculture. I've been seeing that a lot around in bookstores around here. So bookstores and libraries, those are around. So there's a lot of resources. Certainly I can help with any of that. You can email me and I can help give you more resources, but there's a huge plethora of online resources these days relating to permaculture. I'm sure I see a lot of people nodding their heads, so that's one thing that you can look for. Anything else? Yeah.
I do have a question then. So if I was going to choose a chicken, egg, I mean, does it matter in the permaculture scene if it's pasture raised versus they let them go outside occasionally?
Yeah, so there's many different ways of raising chickens. And I've hit on just one little tiny one, right? Pasture raised is certainly one of the best ways, but in terms of in a permaculture system, essentially they're going to end up being pasture raised. Or it's like the free range, pasture raised, all that. That's all very different things. And it really means you really need to know your farmer. That's the main thing. Know the farmer who's raising the chicken, because I think free range just means that they have access to a piece of land that's like this, right? They can go there. They probably won't, because all their food and warmth is over here in their little tiny indoor enclosure, but they do have access to it. Pasture raised means they have a certain amount of grass they can go onto. Again, maybe they don't want to go there because all their good stuff's right over here, right? So know the farmer, know their practices. That's the thing. Encourage the local food by knowing the farmers and demanding that local food, because that's what's going to make the change. If people just keep buying the crappy eggs off the shelf, that's just going to continue the demand for that, and that's not going to change anything. Look for the quality of the food and know how your food's produced. That's the key.
How do you think farmers are receptive to incorporating permaculture techniques into their already established farm?
It's a good question. There's some sort of pushback in many ways for that I've seen and I've heard, but the main pushback for that is actually it's because permaculture looks at the whole, right? Farmers know their specific way of doing things, and they know how to produce really well, and farmers are amazing. I'm never going to knock a farmer for doing what they're doing, because they're growing the food that we're eating. Good job, you guys, right?
Yeah.
But there are ways to incorporate other systems to make that change, and there's a lot of resistance to change, because if you know that you're going to make a product, because farmers don't make much money, right? They don't make much money. So if they know they can make this amount of product using these techniques and make this amount of money to support themselves and their family, they're going to keep doing that. So with permaculture techniques, it's been proven, there's actually graphs and different things to show it, but when you go into permaculture technique, you usually have a dip for 2 or 3 years.
Soil health.
Exactly, you're building up soil. And the second the soil is built up, then you have this huge upswing of production. Really, that should be backwards to you guys, right? So, but that's how it is. It's like, it does take a while to build the soil, because you're basically changing completely how you're managing your whole system. You can't just change it like that. It takes time. It takes at least 2 or 3 years to make any kind of change like that, when you're really focusing on the soil and building that soil health and all the health of the environment around there. So it takes time, but that's why we have to start now. We have to encourage people to do that and support the people who are doing that, so that more people are like, oh, maybe I should change to that kind of system.
Do you have any farmers coming out and looking at your system and seeing those high yields and going, I'm going to try incorporating some of this?
I can't speak specifically for 21 acres, because we're not really a permaculture farm per se. We're practicing organic, and we are trying to moving towards the permaculture techniques. But there are many places like Joel Salatin. He's doing a lot of permaculture principles on his. He does a lot of. He's kind of this huge guy. He's on the East Coast. He does a lot of pasture-raised chickens and cattle and all that. And he's doing these really cool rotational grazing systems that are quite remarkable and amazing. Like rotating there and seeing how much soil building is happening on his property. He has proof of it too. He takes tests and all that. So that's a really good resource to look into the specific answer to that question.
Who is that?
Joel Salatin. That's one. And there's many other people in the permaculture world who are doing similar things. That's just one that I happen to have at the top of my head right now. Yeah.
So
Okay, last
21
one,
Acres
sorry.
has a CSA.
Yep.
So people can join that. Do you know if CSAs in the area that are practicing permaculture?
I would have to think on that and get back to you. I don't have one right off the top of my head, but I think there are more and more those things are happening. So you have to just keep on. Really, I said it earlier, the key point is know your farmer. Know the people producing your food, or produce your own food. That's even better, because then you know exactly what's happening because you're doing it. You know, that's the best way to do it. But know the farmer. Just go and meet them and see how they're managing their property and how they're treating their animals and their soil and everything. They should be very welcome to you checking it out. If they're not, maybe there's something not going right quite there.
Okay.
Thanks for your attention. Thanks for your time, and we're going to get you set up.